going to tell you a story. And I want you to be brutally honest with yourselves, because this might have resonance for you. Your car's broken down. You're walking down a dark road late at night, just trying to get to the safety of home. But suddenly out of the shadows, a very large man comes walking directly towards you. Now, you're right to be apprehensive, based on your own physical stature and your gender, even though consciously you know that the proportion of friendly large men far outweighs that of violent large men. But here's the honesty bit. What if that large man also has different skin color to yours? Now, I had this reaction one time in Los Angeles, and it's an epic fail, and I was shocked and ashamed at myself. Somehow an image had gotten lodged in my brain that wasn't true. It didn't relate to my own personal experience, and certainly didn't line up with my own personal values. How did this happen? In short, your brain plays tricks on you, and it does it all the time. Psychologist Peter Berger says, we often think that what we imagine and what we perceive are two completely different things, but an example like that shows you that sound and image in your imagination totally determines the perceived reality around you. So my talk's about how we think, or how we think we think. And I have a lot of experience in this because for the last 25 years I've worked as a composer of music for film and television. That catchy little tune I just played is one of mine. And so I manipulate you for a living. I make you laugh and cry, cheer, grab the edge of your seats, and sometimes scream. And it's amazing how easy it is to turn a simple walk down a hallway into a totally terrifying experience. And it happens literally in the blink of an eye. So I deceive you for entertainment, but we deceive ourselves all the time, as we just found out. And the media and others love to do it to us. And most of the time we don't even know it's happening because our brains are so busy taking all the information coming in, creating from it a personal version of the world just to get by, all the while modulated by our emotions. And fear is the most powerful of those emotions because it has survival value. It threatens our very existence at times, and at least it stops us from being all that we can be. The amazing thing is we don't spend any time teaching how to overcome it. If anything, we only engage with it after the damage is done, and there is no class in school called Fear 101. Now, this career that I've had wasn't exactly planned. I graduated college in an entirely different field, but I always knew I loved music. Unfortunately, as a child, I didn't work hard enough, and so I was a terrible instrumentalist, so I'm left as an adult trying to figure out how to create a career from playing the piano badly, the French horn even worse, and don't even talk about percussion. So rock band's not even on the cards. Fortunately, I had two things going for me. One was an idea, and my idea was that all noise, and specifically industrial noise, was an emotional language that was just on the cusp of becoming accepted as music and was going to sell millions of records. Didn't turn out that way. Fortunately, my other thing going for me was a personal characteristic called determination. And even though the entire world told me my idea was stupid, I was not going to fail. And so fear of failure became my greatest motivator. And I want to talk a little bit about fear of failure because it's a kind of fear that we all share. And if we can understand the elements that are at work in this personal insecurity, I'm going to show you that the same elements are at work in some of the greatest problems that we face as human beings. So fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of disappointing friends and family, fear of fear itself, which is shame, embarrassment, and guilt. And another psychologist, Carl Albrecht, tells us that these mechanisms threaten the very integrity of ourselves, the shattering of our sense of capability, lovability, and worthiness. If we think about that, disintegration of self is pretty huge. And fortunately, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, all fear springs from ignorance. So if we can teach how to overcome it, we should be okay, right? We're starting to understand some of the things we should be doing. We should be redefining failure itself right from the start, such that the only real failure is not taking risks at all. Secondly, we can have lofty goals, but we need to provide this process of smaller, achievable goals along the way, otherwise we give up. And thirdly, we need to look for inspirational role models. And this is all great. This is what teachers are working on right now, but it's just words. And the difficulty we have of putting it into practice is a direct result of the same limitations of our visualizing ability that I'm talking about here. Let's do a tiny experiment, really almost trivial. But I'm going to say a word and I want you just to retain the first thing that comes into your mind. Okay? Apple. I don't think we need to take a poll to know what the result might be. Quite a few people are going to have, the apple that grows on a tree, old school people. But there's a lot of geeks here, and there's probably going to be quite a few watching online as well, so I'm sure there's going to be some Apple computers and Apple logos in there. The thing that we won't have is the word apple, because we think in pictures, not in words, and Plato was the first one to understand that all those years ago, when he said that when we see an image, in order to make meaning from it, we compare it to an ideal image in our brains. Well, he had the process right, but this referent image that we find in our brains ain't ideal, far from it. So think about the role model I was talking about. If we have a role model in front of us, usually it's that role model already a success. What we don't have is a succession of images which show the narrative of their personal growth. We don't ever get to see them fail. We don't get to see them adjust and then succeed. Now, it can be done. You see it with athletes, when they line up a kick at goal, for example. You can see them stitching together the frames into a mental image of how they're going to achieve that task. But if you're not experienced in a field, all you usually are stuck with is one still image, or at best, a GIF, a short clip. And you don't have really useful features like zoom or pan. And the problem becomes very acute when we talk about big problems in the world like global conflict, climate change, and water depletion, because we are just incapable of creating a complex movie in our minds of something that has such a long timeline. And what happens is we find the problem insurmountable and we just give up. Either that or we're already in denial, like so many people. So, can we use this tricky brain and turn the tables on it? Maxwell Maltz makes the interesting assertion: the subconscious mind can't tell the difference between an actual event and one that's vividly imagined. And psychologists also tell us that if we want to make profound personal changes, we need to connect them to powerful motivating emotions. Since 2013, we've known that, and when we create a mental image, it takes 11 different sections of the brain to create that image. So in order to marshal those forces, wouldn't it be a good idea to have already started trying to replace these stubborn mental negative images with positive ones? Here's an example. So this is what might be our referent image of disabled or something like that. And it's not unusual. But what if we changed it to that? The joy and determination on these young guys' faces just achieves a radical break with the concept disabled. And if you like in our mental image, the focal point is panned up away from the area of failure, which is their feet, to the area of success, which is their spirits. And that actually gives us a way of re-engaging with the young lady in the previous slide, because if we were to approach her, it wouldn't be with a mental image of pity or hopelessness. It would be with a positive image of a possible future for her, and it would be that much easier to say hello. We could call this counterintuitive framing, but anyway, failure becomes a friend. The problem is we're also manipulated by people who have more sinister motivations, greed or something else. Neuroanatomy just recently found that there's a reason why this works so well, and that's that the pathways of connection between the emotional processing center of fear in our brains, the amygdala, up to the thinking brain, the neocortex, is not symmetrical. That the connections from the fear center to the thinking brain are much more robust than those going back down. And that goes a long way to explaining why once an emotion is aroused in us, it's really quite hard to turn it off. All fear is insecurity. And exactly the same processes that are at work in our personal insecurities come into play with global insecurity, economic insecurity. We all know how easy it is to take people with economic insecurity, turn that into fear, fear into prejudice against others, then into anger, and finally into violence. And there are those out there who keep up this constant barrage of negative images, homophobes, xenophobes, racists, militarists. We need to be able to trust our referent images in order to survive. But in order to survive well, we need to be able to mistrust them. We need to be able to say to ourselves, why do I feel this way about this person or this other person? Because this is not abstract, this comes down to feelings. Is that my mental image? Is it true? Or did somebody else put it there? And if so, what was their motivation? And more importantly than anything, how do I change it for the better? So we're hurtling into a world of almost unimaginable information explosion. Futurist and director of engineering at Google, Ray Kurzweil, has predicted that within 20 years, we will have nanobots inserted into our cranium that are going to allow us to communicate directly to the cloud, enabling a huge explosion in human thought. Now, seems fantastical, but I can tell you, Ray Kurzweil is almost always right. So we better get used to the idea that one of our fundamental challenges is how we negotiate the cloud. It's all right to be connected to the cloud, but where in the cloud is very important. Imagine the emotional impact of such a direct connection. Nobody ever talks about that, and how easy it would be to take advantage of. And in the same time frame, CEO, chairman of X Prize, Peter Diamandis, another brilliant man, has said that he expects to live in a world of what he calls perfect knowledge. I'm not sure what that means, but I, for one, am very circumspect about claims that knowledge is somehow democratic or neutral. Because all information's the subject of gatekeepers, bottlenecks, and the tyranny of power, the kind of power that likes to dumb us down, mislead us, and lie to us. And even if it's not the blatant exercise of power, even what we think is neutral, like a Google now or something in the future, if you search certain things, you'll find a real bias towards the negative, the sensational, the lowest common denominator. So our filters are going to become our most crucial possessions, and we need to get our teachers and our parents to start working with kids to teach them how to filter positively. Now finally, all this has a global imperative. The corporate media, we know how they make their money. They focus on disaster, conflict, and crime, and they're not going to change their way of working. Here's what they've been feeding American people about Iran since 1979. And frankly, that's about all any American knows about Iran, and I'm not terribly sure that any of us in the rest of the world know very much more. It took me a long time. The bias on the internet towards these kind of images was quite extreme, but finally I found these images. Picnic day in Tehran. We need to use our social networks and the new capacity of technologies of visualization to redress the imbalance in these images. This is an image that I recognize, and this is an image that I love, because apart from location, it's myself and my family on a day off. We desperately need to set our preferences for the future. It's hard to hurt the ones you know.